Cindy. And again, I want to take a chance to thank the audience so far for their great attendance. My name is Yannis Katsavounidis. I've been at Facebook for a little bit over 2 years, and it's a great pleasure today to have with me at least Professor Al Bovic. Our other guest, Professor Ko, has some technical difficulties, and I'm not sure if he will manage to finally join us. But I think it's good to have you here. And I think there is nobody in this audience that doesn't know you. But having heard all these interesting presentations from Facebook, first of all, do you have any initial thoughts? You heard SSIM all over, mentioned by at least 3 of our presenters. What do you think so far?
Well, my first impression, of course, is that 20 years ago we had a vision that one day we'd be able to inject perceptual science, vision science, into video engineering applications. And so it's very gratifying to see this happen now at the greatest scales. Of course, we couldn't necessarily anticipate the degree to which video has begun to absolutely dominate our lives, especially during this COVID crisis. But it's an amazing thing overall. In terms of the presentations, I heard a number of topics that I thought were very interesting. One of which, of course, was something that we didn't really think much about for a long time, and even only recently it's something I'm hearing more and more about, and that's energy consumption of, well, let's just say of video in general. We've been talking about energy consumption by quality assessment models. Well, the internet today consumes almost 2% of all U.S. electrical consumption. Of course, a lot of that is data centers and so on, but it's also everything. All these devices and laptops and everything else. It's a lot, and it's growing. And when we realize that video is 80% of the traffic almost, or around, you hear various figures, we recognize that we in the video field we're responsible. 2% is a lot, and given increasing video demands, of course, it's only going to get worse. We're going to see, 8K. I'm convinced we'll see 16K at home in my lifetime, and bit depths and everything else. So investigating video quality assessment in terms of computation and energy consumption is important, not only for controlling people's quality of experience, optimizing bitrate, but also energy consumption. I think it's a new dimension that we have to add to these models, however it's expressed. In terms of VQA, I think it's wonderful to think that they're here to stay, but there's so much more work to be done. First of all, there's HDR. There are models out there for assessing HDR quality, but I think we have a long ways to go before we've really solved that. And even perhaps more so, higher frame rates. High frame rate videos are becoming very popular, sports and that sort of thing, and the devices can support it, but we don't really have perceptual models out there yet that fully exploit the temporal dimension to handle things like stutter and judder, all these kinds of things. 8K is coming, 16K is coming, and so on.
So I'm taking.
That's one of my first things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you for that. I think because of the audience, I believe there are a number of PhD students and researchers out there. What do you think is then the next frontier? You already mentioned higher frame rates, higher bit depths, right, and maybe HDR. But the much desired question these days is there room for neural networks and something that will go past the statistical or more classical approaches? And what's your take on this?
Absolutely. Deep video quality assessment model, this is one of our main research focuses right now in live. Of course, it's a data-driven subject. And so you need lots of data, which means we're doing really large-scale human studies, and these are ongoing right now, some of them, to collect literally millions of judgments of video quality. So I'm convinced that one day let's just call it neural video quality assessment will be the solution. But today, you know, when you compare performance on data sets, simpler algorithms, you know, when you see SIM being only 0.03 below a, you know, 10 million parameter deep model, it's hard to justify the expense of trying to build that in yet. But, you know, so one day it'll come, but not yet, I think.
Good, thank you. And actually, this goes my point. I mean, I sometimes see people forcing their way, right? They need to sort of, they feel compelled to include these models. And of course, the question that comes along with it, how much energy is this going to cost us? So always that energy trade-off is going to be important. But thank you. These are very insightful, you know, comments coming from you, as you've said, for 20 years in this field. Allow me to go into a different topic, a topic that I want to hear also your thoughts. I actually just saw in the chat window a very interesting question that I was also planning to ask you. We hear about the adaptive bitrate streaming, which is a de facto standard of delivery today, where people are using this classic approach. You take a content, you encode it n times. Each of them are encoded more or less independently, right? And then they are streamed based on a client decision to switch up or switch down. That's a very simplified way of doing so. Of course, in the past, the concept of scalable video coding has been visited and revisited. And unfortunately, even though a good standard came out of it, it was never adopted. Instead of going into why it was not adopted, which of course I would like to hear your thoughts if you have some, I would like to ask, is it time for us to revisit that idea and maybe put some new thought in making a system that's going to be more scalable, naturally scalable? And what are your thoughts on this? And perhaps how does that fit with not just video coding, which must include this scalability aspect, or could include, but also the quality metrics themselves?
Sure. Well, you know, why, you know, SVC didn't really make it big? Well, I mean, there were a lot of good ideas in there. Like JPEG 2000, there were reasons, you know, why it didn't make, which were a nexus of, well, harder to implement, not guaranteed to work the way you wanted it to in every instance, and maybe just not being worth the extra expense to try to create that when there was other ways of doing adaptive bitrate. That said, I think that, you know, scalability in every way is highly desirable. More granular scalability, for example, than, you know, adaptive bitrate schemes give today. I mean, this really goes to the question of the hybrid codec overall, actually. You know, I think the hybrid codec is one of the greatest engineering achievements of all time. If you think about it, the impact that it's had. But it's, you know, it's being pressed to the limits of its ability to exploit redundancy. I mean, bigger screens help and that sort of thing. But, you know, my advisor, Tom Wong, who, by the way, was one of the founders of the hybrid codec, he said in a different context, he said most of the advances of computer vision are advances of the computer. Well, I think a lot can be said about video compression. And the reason why I'm bringing that up in this context is that I think the end of the hybrid codec isn't that far off. And along with that, motion estimation, motion search, motion compensation. This is a great big energy hog. You know, my background is in visual neuroscience as well as video engineering. And the brain does, you know, while it does compute motion fields for other reasons and so on, it's not involved in the efficient representations of what we see. It's not part of compression, in other words, and I don't think we need to do that. So, you know, going back to neural methods, you know, we see, you know, special sessions, a lot of activity in deep compression models. I think that, you know, we're a generation away from deep compression, but I think it's going to happen. Going back to scalability where this started, I think this is where we will finally see granular scalability happen when we have deep architectures for conducting video compression. I don't think these architectures will require motion search. Instead, they will rely on highly parallel space-time interpolative processes, of which, you know, motion estimation is a too complex version. Deep learning networks are really good at interpolative type concepts. You can see these GANs and so on. And so I think we'll see motion-free compression as an outcome too.
Very good. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I just saw
Professor Koo just joined us, and it's so unfortunate that Dr. Koo, I would at least like you to give a welcome to the people. I know you've had technical difficulties, but unfortunately you joined us towards the end of the discussion, and thanks to Professor Bovik, who answered some of the questions we had. I want to take the time to thank you, both of you, for joining. Again, it's a great pleasure for me personally and for Facebook to collaborate with you in these great problems. We look forward to extending our collaboration in the fields of both video quality and video compression. And again, with that said, thank you one more time. And it's time to pass it back to Sankar for his comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.